And now is my opportunity to share a little bit about who we are and why you're here and why we're here tonight. And just by a show of hands, I'm interested to know who in the room, before you walked into this room tonight, knew little to nothing about the Family Policy Institute of Washington. Okay, great. Welcome. So glad that you are here. And so it is now my job to make sure that you know a little more than little to nothing when you go home. And so we are, and I think we're going to get some slides up here in a second. There we are. We are the Family Policy Institute of Washington. And what do we do? I'm going to try to answer two questions. What do we do, and then why do you do it? Now, we're actually, there are two legal entities that we operate under, because sometimes we do things that are more political than sometimes we do things that are more educational. But this is who we are. We are the Family Policy Institute of Washington, and we are FPIW Action. Now, the issues that we work on, you've heard these referred to, are marriage, life, religious freedom, and parental rights. We don't believe that the value of marriage can be duplicated by any assemblage of adults. We believe that life is sacred, and God created it, so he's the one that decides when it begins and when it ends, and just because it is inconvenient to us, we don't get to make that decision for ourselves. We believe in parental rights. We believe that children belong to their parents and not to the government. A statement that used to not be that controversial, but we are seeing so many examples in which the government wants to substitute its judgment for that of the parents. And we believe in religious freedom and the right of every person, as the First Amendment articulates, to have the free exercise of religion and to make the decisions, the big decisions in their life according to the dictates of their conscience and not according to the dictates of someone else's conscience. So those are the issues that we work on. But what do we do and how do we do those? This is what we affectionately call in the office the wheel. And we think that any organization that is going to affect change, it's going to create public policy, has to do 5 things. Now, at the end of a year, when we decide, have we accomplished anything, what we've set out to accomplish, the way we essentially measure that is, are there more leaders in positions of authority because of what we did, elected officials like the ones that you've seen and met tonight, and have we made an impact on policy? Have we stopped bad bills? Have we passed good bills? Those are kind of the big picture measurements of whether what we are doing is making an impact. But a movement that affects policy has to do 5 things. It has to do 5 things, and that's what I'm going to very quickly describe to you, that everything we do is trying to accomplish one of these 5 things. You have to have a dynamic citizen network, and that is you. That is why you are here, and there's the hundreds of thousands of people who are not here. Danelle, where are you? Danelle, would you stand? I don't know what to tell you. Danelle, please stand. Please stand. She is our grassroots director, and she is the general of our dynamic citizen network. And we need many lieutenants and colonels and captains and all sorts of those things. But Danelle is the one who makes this happen, and it is her, and she's excellent. Those of you who have had the pleasure of meeting her and being with her know that already. But the things that our Dynamic Citizen Network does is we have here, people who, I went too quickly through that. But we bring people to the Capitol. We train them. We have programs, Olympia 101, Olympia 301, our Church Liaison Network, the purpose of which is to allow people to be connected and do things that they didn't previously feel like they were able to do. And some of them step forward, and they even go to the legislature, and they testify. People who wouldn't have had these opportunities, who have a perspective that the legislature would not know about otherwise, except for the fact that we work with them, and we find them, and we make that happen. It's exceedingly valuable. But the other things that we do, our media and communications, I think it's probably the most important thing we can or ever will do, is communicate. It's communicate effectively about the things that matter to us. There's different audiences. There's people who need to be persuaded. There's people who need to be motivated. There's people who simply need talking points. There's people who simply need to know when to show up. And there's some people need to know what the phone number is. But by providing all of that information to the various communities who need that and know what to do with it when they get it, that's what we must do. And there's another thing that we need is relationships with policymakers. Sarah Davenport Smith, are you here somewhere? I want to recognize Sarah. Sarah's kind of in the back, but she was our lobbyist and was down in Olympia. Give her a round of applause. Thank you, Sarah. She, along with others, goes door to door in the legislature and meets with people and explains what the issue is. Any legislator will tell you that they are not experts on everything. And as a result, they rely on people who know about things that they don't know about, who they actually trust, to provide them information that will allow them to be better legislators. You know, we often disagree with our legislators about many things, but universally, their motives are good. They're trying to do the right thing, and it is in our best, you know, they don't always, and sometimes they just disagree with us, right? But we can help them by getting them information that they don't otherwise have. And you've probably been in a situation where you were trying to make a decision with bad information, and it's frustrating. And that's no different for legislators, and that's part of what we do. And we have the relationships with legislators. And we have to know them, they have to know us. And the beauty of having then a network that is communicated to is we take that information, we give it to the communicators who give it to the grassroots network, and then suddenly they're supporting what we're doing in the legislature. Because I'm fond of saying that if we have nobody supporting our position, we can send Jesus to the legislature to be our lobbyist, and they'll thank him politely and forget everything he said. If there are 5,000 people in their legislative district who share our position, who will jump when we say jump, I can send my 10-year-old who's sitting over here to Olympia as our legislator, as our lobbyist, and they'll listen to every word that she says. Because you have to be speaking for people. And that's why we have to develop these things. The other things that we do, the fourth of the thing, is the policy and research. Is we have to have good ideas, and we have to be able to communicate them. And we have to be learning more about what it is that we do. And then the fifth thing is electoral accountability. And I think this is fundamental to any legislative effort. When you're dealing in the political process, you have to be relevant to who is or is not elected. And not only is it advantageous to us to be able to put good people into office, the threat or the leverage of being able to affect someone's election is a primary way in which you influence the policy that we make. And you'll see here the relationship part. But how do we do this? How do we educate voters? And this is an example of a flyer that we would sometimes mail to households to let them know who shares your perspective on life. Voters want to know that. We've done two things in the last year that were, as to my knowledge, the first time in the country these things have been done. We delivered our voter guide via text. You may have heard the radio ads. Thank you, Dino Rossi, for recording those. And this is the first time in U.S. history, as far as I know, that you could text your zip code to a number and within 10 seconds have a voter guide on your phone. If you don't know about it, that's because we need to do better at marketing. And we endeavor to do so. But these are the kind of things that we can now do, because how many times have you talked to somebody, or you've been in this situation yourself, you look at a ballot full of a bunch of names that you don't recognize, and you just say, I'll leave it up to people who know better. And that's a problem that we have to solve, and this is one way we're doing that. Vote Finder, another thing that we did for the first time, we think, in U.S. history, is we made it possible to see if your friends and family have voted before the election was over. In Washington, we have a 3-week voting window, as you know, and through Vote Finder, which lived on our website, you could go in there, create an account, put 10 of your friends, family, all of your conservative people on your little list, and every day, as the matchbacks came back from the Secretary of State, you could see an update. Has their ballot been turned in or not? The ability to keep people accountable and to make sure that my friends and family have turned in their ballot, that's how we make a difference. In the evangelical community alone, 60 million in America in 2014. There are 60 million eligible evangelical voters in America. In 2014, 20 million of them voted. That means 2/3 of our influence stayed at home. We solved that problem, we live in a very different world. And that's one of the things that we're working on doing. And in some cases, when we've done this, the combination of these things in legislative districts, we have, of the network that we've communicated and targeted, we've increased their likelihood to vote by 25% compared to the general populace in those districts. So everything that we do is designed to build a dynamic citizen network, provide great communications, build relationships with legislators, to create good policy and research on which to build our policy, and then provide electoral accountability so the people who work for us know that we're paying attention. Now, what was the result of all this? And I will talk about some of these things, the influence that we had. Things that didn't become law. There was a ban on an attempt to regulate conversations between clients and therapists, essentially, and to make it illegal for a young person struggling with their sexual identity to have help from a professional therapist to give them the kind of help that they wanted. You've heard the story about the telemedicine, the webcam abortion, and Senator Becker's critical role in that. But it was your involvement, the involvement of a lot of people here, and I actually want to take a moment and tell a story on how this whole thing came to be on the telemedicine bill, because this really started 2 years ago. And there were a number of bills in the legislature that were really taking up a lot of time. And there was this quiet little telemedicine bill that on the surface didn't seem like a big issue. And Patty O'Halloran, and she's probably going to yell at me for doing this, and I remember vividly the conversation. This was probably the second conversation we'd had on the phone. And she was telling me all about it. I'm like, yeah. And I'm listening, and she goes, no, I need you to care about this. And I paused, and I said, okay. And I started listening. And that was when, last year, that this whole thing got started. And there's a fun story as to how this all went, because we broke on the lobbying on this bill, and Senator Becker will attest to this, we broke all sorts of protocol in the way we dealt with this. Because it was kind of something, we're a ragtag bunch, and we try our best, but sometimes we're not always on time. But we showed up basically 2 days. It had passed the House unanimously. It was in the Senate, and it had passed the committee unanimously, as far as I know, and it was about to be on the Senate floor when we really kind of realized what this is. This is a big problem, but it's kind of bad form to show up at a party, like at the very end, and tell everybody how to do things, right? So we acknowledge that, but this is a problem. This is a big issue. And so, thanks to my friend Patty, and others, and Peggy, who's sitting here, we basically cutoff is on Friday. Wednesday, we sound the alarm and say, hey, this has to stop. And again, bothering a lot of people that we shouldn't be bothering, and our friends, but we think the cause is important. Friday afternoon, we are sitting on the Capitol steps, and this is Friday before cutoff. Cutoff's at 5 o'clock, and it's about 3:30 in the afternoon, and there'd been a lot of negotiation about this bill. It was tense, and we didn't know what was going to happen. Was this going to be, because we suspected if it came up for a vote, it was probably going to pass, and so we were concerned about that. And before cutoff in the Senate, it's crowded because everybody's there to watch their bill. And I'm sitting on the Capitol steps with Peggy and Patty, and there are people all over us, and it's a Friday afternoon, it's raining outside. And suddenly, about 3:30, we're all on our various devices, right? Because this is what you do. You do this thing. This is how everybody works. And so we're all sitting here staring at our various devices right next to each other, and the cloud, it had been raining all day, and suddenly, from outside in the sky, the clouds parted and a sunbeam came through the roof and the Capitol dome. And if you've been there, you realize that a couple hundred feet up there are windows. And a beam of light shone through the Capitol building into a crowd of people where it was me, Peggy, and Patty. And it was 2 inches on this side of me and 2 inches on the other side of Patty, who was sitting over there. And I looked up, and it's like a spotlight had been turned on. And suddenly, I felt better about what we were doing. Because I'd had a lot of anxiety about this. And 5 minutes later, we got word that this bill was not going to come up for a vote. And all that to say, we really don't deserve a lot of credit for it, because if Patty hadn't called me and said, no, I need you to care, we might not have. But that's why everybody has this role. But that break in the sky was God's way of telling me to listen to the women in my life. And so I do. So thank you, Patty. But other bills, the abortion insurance mandate, and this has been for 4 years, we have been protecting the right of individuals to not purchase insurance that covers abortion. It seems basic and fundamental that you shouldn't be forced to do something that you believe to be immoral, but that's a fight that we're fighting. And for 4 years in a row, we have done so. Third-party visitation. This is a parental rights bill that we think is very important, because it would give a third party, it would give someone else a right to request visitation from a judge over the objection of my wife and I, which is an absurd thing. Both parents could object, but the judge could overrule that and say this third person has the right to know your children. And that is also another issue that we've worked on. Things that we have supported. Wrongful Life Award. Last year, you may have heard about this. Parents were awarded $50 million because they lost the opportunity to abort their child. And that is a cause of action that they said if the doctors had properly diagnosed the defect, they would have aborted. Now that this child is alive, you owe us $50 million. No child should know that the parents think that they are a legal liability and that they would have rather killed that child. We think that kind of a lawsuit should not have a basis in Washington State. The Internet Crimes Against Children Act, and this is one that we were supported. This is one everybody gets to support, but basically we don't provide enough resources investigating Internet crimes against children. And this is one that we got to come together with and with other folks and make that happen so that we're paying more attention to that. Parental notification for abortion. You've seen that mentioned. The good news is we have made more progress on that bill than we ever have on any bill previously. Or on this bill in a decade. It's almost through the Senate, and then we're going to push it through the House. And then informed consent for assisted suicide. Excuse me as I slip on my tongue. But that's a bill that it seemed we have assisted suicide, which of course we don't support. But the idea that you should be made aware of all your options before you're given a lethal dose of drugs seems to be obvious. But alas, it is not part of our law. So these are the things, these are the issues that we work on. Now I want to talk a little bit about the religious freedom issue. And this is one that's going to be, as we look forward, this is what we've done, what are you going to continue to do? And I want to drive home this point that Baronel's story has already it's touched us a little bit as well. But I want to provide some context to this because, the other day a friend of mine, he said, it must be frustrating doing what you're doing because you never know who you're actually helping. And his implication was, I don't know the 17-year-old girl who isn't going to remotely get a chemical abortion because that bill didn't come law. It's true, I don't know her name. But I think that also kind of misunderstands what we do in public policy because we don't just try to change policy as a way of serving people. We serve people as a way of changing public policy. That's what we do, that every person who gets the ability to do something they couldn't otherwise do, that's how we make the difference. One person at a time doing something that they previously didn't know how or weren't motivated to do. That's how you change policy, changing the way people behave. But I want to look forward, and I want to talk a little bit more about this religious freedom. And we're going to cue one more video as I do to put in context what's happened to Baronel and some other friends that we're going to talk about here in just a moment. So let's go ahead and cue that.
This law will not, in fact, it cannot diminish our precious constitutional protections to the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion.
I mean, how would it possibly affect me? I don't believe that it would create a hostile environment on anybody.
Mr. Speaker, could I read from our state's constitution briefly?
Please continue.
In Article 1, Section 11 of the state's constitution, it says, absolute freedom of conscience in all matters of religious sentiment, belief, and worship shall be guaranteed to every individual, and no one shall be molested or disturbed in person or property on account of religion.
The bill before us strikes a similar balance. It allows gay and lesbian couples access to civil marriage while protecting the religious freedom of those who oppose those marriages.
No act of this legislature, no act of the people of Washington, short of an amendment to this Constitution, could abridge our fundamental rights to religious worship and the rights to decide for ourselves what our conscience dictates. There's nothing that this bill can do to change that.
It protects your freedom no matter what you believe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much appreciate the intent of the gentleman from the 4th to protect those who might feel like they're going to be forced to do something that they don't want to do. But in fact, this bill in the other body was already thoughtfully amended to provide the protections and immunities for those who do not wish to participate in anything that would be in connection with solemnization or celebration of these types of marriages.
It protects families and children. And it moves our state closer to the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all people in Washington.
And so we already have the protections in the bill. The amendment, unfortunately, is not necessary, and the bill does adequately protect those that you are concerned about.
That was only 3 years ago, and that was the debate in the Washington State House and Senate. and you hear the conversation that they're having about religious freedom. And in less than 3 years, we've gone to a place where, of course you're not going to lose your religious freedom. No one is going to be affected except those who can now get a marriage license. That was 3 years ago when we were trying to get support for this law. Only 3 years later, of course you're going to lose your religious freedom. What are you, a bigot? How quickly the message has changed from our elected officials. And there's a couple other folks here in the room tonight that I want to recognize and honor. And you heard a little bit about Baronel Stutzman's story. But down, our neighbors to the south, Aaron and Melissa Klein, and Melissa they ran Sweet Cakes by Melissa, which is a bakery. And they were approached in the same way for the opportunity to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. And they declined. And a lawsuit was filed. And just 3 weeks ago, a judge gave an order that they were to pay $135,000 because they declined the opportunity to take. Aaron and Melissa, would you guys please stand up? And they have driven up from Oregon. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And go say hello to them after the dinner, and because the idea that a business would be fined $135,000 because they declined a contract, essentially, that was for a purpose that they did not believe in, is fundamentally un-American. But that's what we're at, and that's what we're fighting. But there's another story, and you guys may have heard a couple weeks ago, or it was about a month maybe, in Indiana. They were debating a religious freedom law. And there was this little pizza place in Walkerton, Indiana. And a reporter walked in and said, hey, what do you think about this new law? And essentially they said, hey, we kind of like it because, and again, gay people don't cater pizzas for their wedding. But if they did, maybe I would, not want to do that. And so the question was asked, and their position became public knowledge. And as a result, boycotts were formed, and they were forced to shut their door, thankfully, temporarily. But Kevin O'Connor is here. He is the owner of Memories Pizza. Kevin, would you stand and be thanked and recognized and appreciated? Thank you. And all of these businesses, just people living their life, somebody walks into their store and then something happens that changes the trajectory of their life and changes their ability to make a living. And that's what we are fighting for right now. And, I tell my kids something. They like video games and not working, essentially. And I tell them sometimes, sometimes you have to step away from the things that you want to do in order to do some maintenance and do the things necessary so that you can continue to do the things that you want to do. Because my children don't recognize that sitting in a climate-controlled room with the ability to turn on a TV with a button, and the ability to turn on a fire with a flip of a switch, the ability to go to a refrigerator and pull out anything that they want, they don't recognize that that's not just how life has always been for everyone at every time. And so we have to explain to them that not only do mom and dad work to pay for things, but if we didn't work to pay for things, we'd have to do this all ourselves. And the beauty of being able to go to the bathroom and use indoor plumbing. And if all of the people who maintain that system decided that they were going to just play video games for the rest of their life, pretty soon we'd have issues and we'd lose the ability to play video games because the power would go out and the plumbing would stop working, and suddenly the environment that was created that allows us to be so comfortable would fall apart if we didn't do any maintenance. And in the same way, we live in a country in which people sacrificed greatly to create a set of rules, to create a constitution that limits the government's authority so that we as individuals could be free. Freedom is not the historical norm. Most people who have lived and died on this planet lived and died in tyranny. And we need to appreciate what a blessing it is to be free and the opportunity that that has allowed us to be prosperous and play video games. But that environment that allows us to do all these awesome things that we want to do does not maintain itself. And it was not built randomly. It was not created randomly. The fact that we sit here in this room, in this country, is not an accident. People gave greatly for it. And now we are being called to do some maintenance. And yes, we'd rather do some other things. But we could either squander the inheritance that we were given, or we can pause for a moment and do the things that are necessary to make sure that when we are gone, our grandkids are as thankful to us as we are to our grandparents. And that's what we're called. And this isn't just about the ability to run our businesses the way we want to, though the right of conscience is important, and we want to protect that. It's all of the other things that are made possible by the right of conscience and religious freedom and the right to be free. Because charitably, in 2009, nonprofit American churches gave $13 billion to overseas relief. The Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability says that 600 evangelical organizations in addition to the churches gave $9.2 billion. Catholic ministries in the United States, $97 billion a year to health care, $47 billion a year for education, $4.6 billion a year for other national charitable relief. Nonprofit organizations inspired by their faith, operating under a tax-exempt status that allows them to do much of what they're doing. The same laws that are targeting Barronelle Stutzman, that are targeting the Kleins, that are targeting the O'Connors, the same laws also threaten the ability of every ministry that has nothing to do with politics to function as they want. Because there's a federal court case moving its way right now, and if the government's position wins, then any discrimination based on gender expression or gender identity will be the same as gender discrimination, which under Title VII, and there's a Supreme Court case on this issue, is grounds for losing your tax-exempt status. And the Supreme Court has said that if you have a policy against interracial marriage, and this was a college in South Carolina, they said you can lose your tax-exempt status. So if the government's position wins and says Title VII applies to beliefs about marriage and sexuality, then the tax-exempt status of every entity that does all this work has nothing to do with politics, but it's called into question. So we are not defending just our right to run our pizza parlor or our bakery or our flower shop according to our conscience. We are defending the right for all of the other great causes that you are involved with to function and operate and change the world. That is what is at stake. That is what we are here to do. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting. God bless you all.